All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Carolyn Merrick. I'm a program coordinator here at the center. And welcome today. We have the owner of Wild Birds Unlimited, Scott Karr, and he's going to talk to us about how birds survive the cold, also how you can help them in the winter months, and a little bit about what to expect during spring. And of course, Scott knows a lot about birds and birding. So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them at the end of his presentation. You can ask in the chat. You can just write your questions or comments in the chat as Scott goes along, and I'll be happy to relay them to him when he's done presenting. Or at the end, I will open it up and people can ask questions. I'll allow you unmute yourself and you can ask questions then. And if you stay till the end, I will put you in a drawing for this wonderful wooden fly-through feeder. And so thank you so much. The only catch is you have to be local. So if you're from another state, I'm sorry. So anyway, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
All right. So I am going to put the presentation up in just a second. I will say just briefly, the fly-through feeders they're one of my very favorite styles of feeder because it's completely open. So it's real comfortable for all kinds of birds and the visibility is terrific. Now, the one thing I will say is that if you've got squirrels love a fly-through feeder too, because they're just going to get up there and sit in there and eat the bird food. So keep that in mind. All right, so now share screen. I am not accomplished at this, but look.
There you go.
All right. So I own the Wild Birds Unlimited store. We are located on 29 North, across on the opposite side of 29 from Fashion Square Mall. There's a big Staples store in the shopping center next to us. Our little strip center has a Starbucks and a Mattress Warehouse in it. I bought the store in 2017 after having a long career in a totally different line of work. I was a customer at the store. And, you know, I don't know if you remember there was that old commercial for razors. That guy was like, you know, I loved it so much, I bought the company. So I bought the store. We've got about 350 stores nationwide. I only own the one in Charlottesville, but it's a franchise system. So if you haven't been in, drop by and say hello. So today's presentation, that's me again. All right. So how birds survive the winter. You know, this is a time of year, especially when we have cold snaps or snows, when we have customers come in who, you know, are worried about the birds and how they get by. And, you know, one of the things that I remind people of is that, you know, the birds, they've been around a long time and they were taking care of themselves in the winter and during other kinds of difficult situations long before we got on the scene. I think that we help them a lot, and I will later on show you some of the things that I recommend to help birds in the winter. But you know, they're well adapted to survive. So the presentation today is going to focus on that. And there's, you know, there's some behavioral adaptations, there's some physiological adaptations. Then we'll talk a little bit about spring, you know, looking forward a little bit, and we'll see where we are at that. I've set my timer as well. So if that goes off, that's just because I need something to help me know how long I've been going for. So as I said, the basic equation is about calories and energy. How many calories am I taking in during the day, and how much energy am I storing up during the day to get me through the long, cold winter nights? And that is fundamentally what it's about. So in order to do that, in order to help stay warm, there are some behavioral adaptations that birds have adopted. Biological adaptations. We're going to go through a few of the common winter birds that are here, you know, year after year. This is a special year. We've got some other birds that are not normally here. that we will also be talking about. A little bit about how we can help birds in the wintertime and all year round, frankly. And there we go, looking towards spring. All right, so the primary strategy for bird survival is just simply to leave. They migrate, and they will they tend to migrate from areas of. I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit with this thing. All right, so migration is fundamentally the movement from areas of lower resources to areas of greater resources, especially food and nesting sites. So, one of the things that has happened this year is something called an eruption with an I, not like Mount Etna, but an eruption where we have lots of birds from further north that are here that normally don't come this far south. And they are here because there was insufficient food production in the boreal forests. And so that has driven them further south than they normally come. I'm going to show you some pictures of those in a little bit later. So more than half of the birds that breed in North America are migratory, and some of them travel really extraordinary distances to and from their nesting sites. So migration, it's always going to happen with the birds. And so it's triggered by a variety of different factors. There's still research being done into what actually prompts a bird to say, hey, it's time to go. But here are a few. One of the big ones is shorter days. So as the hours get shorter and shorter, the birds know that it's about time to start preparing to migrate. The depletion of food sources is another possibility. Temperature, maybe to some extent, but it's really, if you think about what is going to be the most consistent signal that it is time to get up and move, it's going to be the lengthening and the shortening of the days. You could have a warmer winter, you could have a colder winter, you could have banner years for food and years that aren't quite so great. But the changes in the rotation of the Earth around the sun is going to be pretty consistent. So the shorter days actually activate photoreceptors in the bird's brain. So the birds actually start to physically change. So there's like things like the chickadee, the area of the brain in the chickadee that is responsible for memory actually grows at about this time. There are also it also enables birds to pack weight on a little bit easier because they need to store up a ton of energy in order to make that trip. We have people come into the store, fairly regularly who are, concerned that they are going to make the birds stay here if they feed them. This is especially true with hummingbirds. People get really worried about the hummingbirds. And, no matter how great your food is, no matter how fabulous your feeder is, when it is time to migrate, the birds are going to migrate. And so we don't need to worry about, I call them Archie Bunker birds. We don't need to worry about creating lazy birds that sit around their recliner all day. All right, a little bit more on migration. So, the hard wiring for migration has been studied. There's a German word for this, that these caged birds at about the time they would be migrating will get agitated inside of their cages. I didn't put the word on here. You can look it up if you want. I cannot pronounce it. It's one of those extremely long German words. I think it goes on for 2 lines. One of the things that investigators have done is to actually, kidnap birds or bird nap them. So they take them from their normal spot where they would begin their migration, hundreds, thousands of miles away, and the birds find their way back to their home, to their summer and winter home. So, one of the things that is I find fascinating is that, the birds will take different migratory paths in order to have a better shot at, finding food. So these are all things that are like deeply ingrained into the birds. I mean, it's pretty remarkable when you think about it. We tend to, there, I like to think that the animals have all different kinds of intelligence, right? And so birds have these particular skills and this particular kind of intelligence. So, many of our birds that are here in the summertime they travel back to South America in the winter months, and this includes the hummingbird. So the ruby-throated hummingbird, which is tiny, flies from Central and South, Central America, South America, and Mexico, and across the Gulf of Mexico, all the way up the eastern seaboard into Canada. There's another hummingbird called the rufous hummingbird that migrates from Central America, South America, all the way up to Canada. So basically kind of goes diagonally across the United States, some of them into Canada. There are other birds here. There's a bird called the Arctic tern that migrates from the Arctic to Antarctica. It has a 50,000 mile migratory pattern. It's truly extraordinary. Some of these birds, like the terns, have developed mechanisms so that they can actually fly and sleep. So there were researchers put sensors on the heads of some of these birds, and they found that the birds would be fully asleep and flying at the same time. So again, going back to just how deeply ingrained this is, even first-time migrants that are traveling alone somehow know how to get from point A to point B. So the navigation isn't fully understood. Birds migrate primarily at night, and so the theory is that they use celestial bodies as one of their migratory, direct maps, so to speak. Landmarks on the Earth's surface, and also the Earth's magnetic field. And just so one of the reasons that, if you think about it, the reason that birds migrate at night, it makes a lot of sense. There's fewer predators at night. If you're doing this long migration, then you need to spend your days fueling up on calories. You need to eat. And if you're traveling during the day, you're going to cut into your time to forage for food. So, nighttime travel is the norm. Some migration dangers. Predators, obviously they're always an issue, but when you've got very large numbers of birds all traveling at the same time and being tired, it's a pretty exhausting, arduous journey. Predation is a significant factor. Weather, if a hurricane or a cyclone shows up, it can really impact birds. This is not exactly weather related, but there was the tragedy on the West Coast with all of these birds that were migrating from the Northwest, not surviving because of the fires, sending up plumes of smoke and particulate matter into the air. Exhaustion, it's an extremely tiring thing to do. Lights, especially in cities. So there are a couple of things that happen. Birds can strike windows, but also as big a problem is that they get confused by the lights and they just start flying around and they exhaust themselves and they die that way. And so there's a program whereby cities turn off their lights during peak migration times to help birds, not get confused and end up dying in the cities. They even did this, with the lighting for the Twin Towers that they do. They've actually even adjusted those lights so they turn them on and off to help not confuse birds. Buildings, as I said, window strikes are a common problem, especially if you've got these giant, buildings that are all glass. It can, a bird can it can look to a bird that it can fly right through it. This happens at people's homes, by the way, as well. I mean, it is not one of the common things that we help people with is, birds are hitting my windows. What can I do to help prevent that? Habitat loss is huge. There's just, we have done a lot of developing on the face of this earth in terms of houses and in terms of commercial development. So what I think about is what can I do as an individual and in my yard, and I'll touch on this again later. I've tried to create an environment where if a bird wants to stop over here, it's going to find what it needs. But habitat loss is an enormous, enormous challenge. So we'll move on to a few more strategies that the birds use. I will just say briefly that there was a study done, I don't know, it was a year and a half ago, I think, that showed that 30% of the breeding birds in North America, there was a 30% decline in them. So it translates into 3 billion birds. And, I'm not in the business of trying to convince real estate developers or commercial developers to do things differently. I'm really focused on what I can do around my home. And again, we'll return to that theme later in the presentation. So here you've got 3 adorable bluebirds and in the winter. And you can obviously tell there's not a lot of leaves. These are also real puffy. And so one of the strategies birds will use in the wintertime is to puff up their feathers, because that creates distance and a barrier between the cold air and their skin. I mean, I don't know how many of you have down comforters, but there's a reason why down comforters are so desirable. All right. Here's a few of their strategies for surviving the cold. So just talked about the feathers and the puffing up. I will say, just as a brief aside, one of my favorite moments in my store is we had some customers come in who had been buying birdseed somewhere else. And they decided that they wanted to buy birdseed from us. And so we talked to them and they left happy. And they came back a couple weeks later and they said, Scott, we really love your birdseed, but we're afraid that the birds like it so much that they're getting fat. Which of course is very flattering, because I'm very proud of our birdseed. But in fact, what they were saying is, these birds in the wintertime that really puff themselves up dramatically in order to stay warm. Strength in numbers. So during like breeding, mating season, there's a lot of territoriality, not a lot of group behavior, much more group behavior in the wintertime. You may see just enormous flocks of robins this time of year, sort of marauding from one place to another. Marauding is probably not exactly the right verb to use with robins, but anyways, going from one place to another. Birds, especially overnight, will gather close to each other to share warmth. They will sometimes gather in cavities, roosting boxes, in order to share warmth as well. The other thing is that if you're in a group of birds, if one bird finds some food, the other birds find some food. It can also help with predators, more eyes on the sky. And of course, this time of year, there's not a lot of foliage to protect birds on the ground from being spotted by raptors. So birds have different kinds of vasculature. So they can actually reduce the blood flow to their feet in order to help maintain more blood flow and warmth further up into their main body cavity. They also have vasculature that helps to distribute the warmth of blood flowing from the heart to blood flowing back up to the heart. You will sometimes see birds. I mean, you see it not infrequently. A bird will be sitting on a branch and it'll have one leg tucked up underneath itself, and that's, designed to help retain warmth. So when you think about, I was talking before about energy and calories in, energy and calories out. So you don't want to run out of fuel, right? So basically you run out of fuel and you stop. So one of the things that some birds can do is, particularly overnight, they will slow their metabolism down. And by slowing their metabolism down, they're using less fuel. So they have more fuel to help them make it through the night and have fuel in the morning. So they can get up and start looking for food again. Chickadees do this. Some hummingbirds can actually go into a state of a near torpor. Of course, the risk of some of this is, if you slow your metabolism way down, it takes time to emerge from that, and you can be vulnerable to predators eating. So, birds spend a tremendous amount of their time looking for food. I mean, that's their job, especially in the wintertime. How many calories can I get in order to make it to the next day? They're not distracted by other things like, finding a mate, defending territory, raising chicks, and the like. They eat and they sleep. So in the fall, in particular, there are birds that will cache food. A lot of birds will cache food. Nuthatches will take food and store it. Chickadees, probably the bird that is most known for caching are blue jays. And they will hide food in hundreds and hundreds of different places, and will remember where it is. One of the things that's kind of fun to do in the fall, and even in the winter, is to put out whole peanuts in a feeder, and the jays will come and grab them. Sometimes they'll open them and eat them. Sometimes they fly off with them to hide them. And jays actually they'll pick up peanuts in a shell, and sort of sometimes they'll test them out and see, I don't really like this one, and so they'll put that one down. They'll pick out another one and see if they like that one. But it's just, it is remarkable that they can remember all the different places that they hide this stuff. I mean, about 3 times a week, I lose my keys for 30 or 45 minutes. And so, if I hide something, there's a good chance it's never, ever going to be found again. So, we all shiver when we're cold. Birds shiver too. It's a different kind of shivering. It has more to do with muscle contraction that helps to create heat. So it's not the same kind of uncomfortable shivering that we engage in. So birds, my bird feeders, sometimes I'm looking over here because my bird feeders are out there, and I just saw a squirrel jump on one of them. I'm going to leave it be. Anyway, so birds can sense drops in barometric pressure. So if you've got a really big storm coming, sometimes you will find birds hitting the feeders really, really hard, because they want to store up as much as they can before the storm makes it, difficult or impossible to get food for some period of time. This is true, when we have like a tropical depression that makes it up this far, you can see that in advance of very large, big snowstorms, you can see that as well. All right, so I thought that we would just spend a little time going through a few of our migratory winter residents. So this is the white-throated sparrow, one of my very favorite birds. And I'm not going to try and do its call because I'm really bad at that, but it has this wonderful call. This is the bird, when I hear it, I know that fall is here. And then in the springtime, when I hear the wood thrush. So it's the wood thrush in the spring and the white-throated sparrow in the fall that sort of signal the change in seasons for me. These are ground feeders. You'll see them down scratching around. There's a really nice bird seed called millet that's inexpensive. I just buy, I just get a little 5-pound bag and throw handfuls on the ground. These guys really, really love it. Some of them will have that yellow coloring, and some of them will have more of a tan coloring. Has nothing to do with sex. It's just a genetic mutation within the population of the sparrow. And these, again, so these are birds that are here in the winter and they're going to leave. So these are just the migratory ones. They're not all the ones who stick around all year round, of which we have many, including the bluebirds and the goldfinches, titmice, or woodpeckers, chickadees. This is the dark-eyed junco, also a ground feeder. I see a lot of these when it snows. They really, and I think they have a nickname, the snowbird, but they really come out in the snow, and you'll see them scratch around on the ground. Again, millet is a great bird seed for these little guys. Yellow rumped warbler. This is a bird that really likes suet. They don't go to feeders super often, but they will go to suet feeders. This is a ruby crowned kinglet. Excuse me. Most of the time when you see this bird, you're not going to see that prominent red top. It only puts that up, for I think defense or when it's agitated. Most of the time it's down, but you can still see the little dot on the top of its head, on the male. It's got those big eyes. It looks a tiny bit like a goldfinch just because of coloring on the wings, but it's a little bit smaller. It'll go to suet. I had one a couple of years ago that stuck around for several months eating off of my suet feeder. I haven't seen one since, but they're great little birds. So this is a purple finch, and this is a bird that we don't normally get this far south. This is one of those birds that's here as part of an eruption. And by contrast, this is the house finch. So this is not the best picture of a purple finch. I should have gotten one where you can see the top of its plumage is a little more puffed up, but it's more brilliantly colored. The house finch, the feathering tends to be way closer to the head, and it's not, quite as brilliantly patterned, brilliantly colored. All right, so on the left is our American goldfinch. Now, this is one of these birds that people will come into the store and they'll think, the goldfinches have left, and they're actually here all year round. But the difference between their winter plumage and their summer plumage, and the male in particular, is so dramatic they don't even look like the same bird. So the male goldfinch, that's yellow and black, or gold and black in the spring and summer, in the winter is sort of a drab greenish gray kind of color. I'm showing you this picture because you got your goldfinch on, as I'm looking at my screen, on the left, and then on the right is a bird called a pine siskin. They look a little similar at first glance on the feeder, but you can see they're very different. So the one on the right has a lot of striping, a lot of varied coloration, and on its breast, it's very striped. You don't see that on the goldfinch. These birds are down here in enormous numbers this year. I've had customers with 30, 40, 50. I had one customer say they had over 100 of these birds come into their feeders. We had a salmonella outbreak with these birds as well. They're particularly susceptible to salmonella poisoning. And they gather in such enormous numbers that we had a few customers finding deceased birds. So if you have any of those pine siskins and if you start finding them dead, then you should take down your feeders for a week or two to give them time to move along. I haven't had reports recently, but for a while there, we were having pretty regular reports. They're amazing birds, and they really do show up in huge numbers. They're like Niger, just like the goldfinches do. Some people call it thistle seed, but they'll also eat sunflower seeds. They love that too. So this is a red-breasted nuthatch, which is related obviously to our white-breasted nuthatch. It's smaller, it's got that little red patterning, and it's louder than the nuthatch, the white-breasted nuthatch, interestingly enough. Also a bird that is not commonly here in the winter. So this is an evening grosbeak. Absolutely stunning bird. Very, very rarely makes it to our part of the world in significant numbers. There are quite a few around this winter. They love platform feeders like that fabulous wooden one that is behind Carolyn's shoulder. They love an open feeder, and they love black oil sunflower seed. So when I heard these birds were coming, I went and I got myself that exact same feeder, actually, that is behind Carolyn, and I put it up, and I am waiting and waiting, and I've still not seen one. That's one of the things about watching the birds, especially with the sort of special ones. You hope, and sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you don't. I mean, I've put out an oriole feeder every year for the last 5 years, hoping an oriole will show up, and I've still not had luck. At least not when I was looking. They're probably showing up when I'm not there. All right. A few words about how you can help the birds in the winter. Again, they're well adapted to survive, but we can really make a big difference for them as well and help them along the way. So the first has to do with food. High-fat foods. What you're looking at here is a pileated woodpecker on a suet feeder. So suet is basically rendered beef fat that is then augmented with nuts and other, sometimes mealworms to be very attractive for the birds. You'll see it in this sort of form, cakes that can go into feeders like that. We sell little suet balls that can be mixed in with just bird seed. We sell cylinders of the stuff as well. We even sell spreadable. We sell this stuff that you can spread on a tree for the birds to eat. Sometimes people think about water in the context of us as human beings, right? And when do you want to go to the pool? You want to go to the pool when it's hot. Well, the fact of the matter is, good sources of water are critical for birds all year round. And, this is especially true when we have hard freezes. And I don't know if it was like 3 years ago, we had that polar vortex that camped over central Virginia. I mean, it felt like months. I think it was a couple of weeks, really, really cold. Temperatures didn't really get out of freezing. So everything is icy. And it's very hard for birds to get water when everything is iced over. So I, keep my bird baths clear of ice, every morning. And the birds absolutely love it, especially right now. I mean, I've got just dozens of robins that are taking turns lining up around the baths. Also, I will say, a bird bath is every bit as fun, if not more fun, than watching birds at a feeder. Because when the birds get in the bath, this time of year when it's cold, they're not necessarily going to be in there bathing so much. It's important for fluid for drinking. But in the summertime, watching a bird get in there and splash around and just having a ball and making a mess is a ton of fun. Housing. So this is a Bluebird house. You can also get roosting boxes. A roosting box basically looks like this house, except the hole is on the bottom, and inside the box there are perches so that you can have multiple birds in there at one time. The hole's in the bottom, of course, because heat rises, and so that just helps to increase the warmth in the box. I've got them up in my yard. I can't say that I see birds going in and out of them, all the time, but that's largely because they're going in there at dusk and wintering, overnight to stay warm. Birds will go into cavities, they'll cluster in bushes and all kinds of things to help stay warm. All right, let's talk about spring. We have a beautiful male cardinal. So spring is a time for pairing up, mating, and then, having broods of chicks. So this is just sort of the calendar of when these things happen. You got the cardinal going March to August, so pretty long breeding periods. Most birds will have, more than one set of eggs and more than one set of broods in a season. Your Carolina wren, your house wren. The house wren is a migratory bird, so that bird is here in the summertime. Chickadees, robins, goldfinches have a pretty long breeding period. Your house finch. Most of the people who come into my store who are interested in putting up a birdhouse are interested in putting up a bluebird house. So the bluebirds, they'll start pairing up in March. And they'll start mating in late March, early April, and you'll see 2 to 4 broods per season with the bluebird. It's very easy to put up a bluebird box. And Carolyn, I have actually a couple of houses. Oh, there goes my timer. I have a couple of houses that I can show maybe at the end as well if people are interested. I've never done like actual show and tell of something, but we can give that a shot if you want.
Sure.
So, different birds have different personalities, and different bird nests have different personalities. The American robin's nest, so they're going to be in trees and bushes. You can see a very, very tidy nest made of predominantly pine needles. Those vibrant blue eggs. Chickadee nests. You can tell chickadee nests because they use a lot of moss. So if you see a mossy nest, then it's almost certainly a chickadee nest. Here's your northern cardinal. Again, bird's going to nest in bushes and trees. Not a cavity nester. So, when people come in, when they want to buy a box for nesting, there are only certain birds that are going to do that. Cardinals aren't one of them. I love the Carolina wren. So the Carolina wren just looks like it has way better things to worry about than building a pretty nest. the Carolina wren just looks like, I need to get this done because I have other things that I want to do. And so you get this jumble of stuff. It tends to have a kind of a deep hole in the middle. Wrens are also notorious for nesting absolutely anywhere. They will nest in mailboxes. They will nest in potted plants. They will nest. I've had customers who had wreaths on their door that the wrens built the nest inside of, so they couldn't. They were very nice people. They just decided not to go in and out the front door for a while. They went out the garage, I guess. And here's the Eastern Bluebird nest, another very neatly constructed nest out of pine needles, light blue eggs. You can see this one is actually in a box. All right, so your cavity nesters. Wrens, chickadees, tree swallows, your woodpeckers, owls, bluebirds. And I saw owl boxes. So owls, there are a number of owls that will actually nest inside of a box. What nests in a box really depends on the diameter of the hole. So most a bluebird box should have a 1.5-inch diameter hole. Now smaller birds will also go and nest in there, including your wrens, your chickadees, and house sparrows, house sparrows will fight bluebirds and will actually kill bluebirds in order to take over a nest. So they are a noxious bird in that sense, and they're non-natives. They're actually an invasive species from Europe. All right, bluebird boxes. So, when we think about our impact on the world and how that affects animals, including birds, a lot of what you hear is not positive, but there are really, really positive stories. And one of them has to do with the Eastern Bluebird. So in the 70s, early 70s in particular, the bluebird population was in pretty steep decline. And I believe actually there's a guy who worked for the NIH, started built some of these boxes and started putting them up around the campus up in, I guess, Maryland. And this initiative just sort of spread and spread and spread. So now you'll see bluebird boxes all over the place. And that helps to compensate for a decline in their natural nesting cavities. So now, golf courses, parks, fences, people's yards, you see bluebird boxes everywhere. And we've really made a difference in the survivability of the bird. And so we can do really great things as people and really helpful things as individuals on this planet as well. So a bluebird box should be mounted about 5 to 6 feet high. You don't want it hanging from a tree. They prefer it to be fixed. These are all rules of thumb. I mean, I had a customer with a bluebird that was figured out how to nest in a wren box one time, and it was hanging from an eave. But to increase the likelihood of attracting a bluebird, these are the things that you would want to look at. The bluebird likes to be able to look out of its box, and part of that has to do with safety. It also has to do with they like bugs. They're looking for bugs in the spring and summer. In the fall and winter, they are happy to come to bird feeders, and they will eat hulled sunflower seeds, the little suet balls. But in the spring and summer, especially when they're feeding the young, they're going to look for live bugs. They'll have 2 to 4 broods a season. And it's the same, it's generally the same couple, well, multiple broods in one box. And they will build one nest on top of the other, which is why we strongly recommend that you should go in and clean out the nest after each brood. Part of it has to do with just cleanliness, but also, they'll run out of room. They'll build nest after nest after nest on top of each other until they don't have any more room in the box. And then, guarding against predators. So it's really, really sad when a black snake or a raccoon manages to get into a box, a bluebird box. And black snakes in particular are good animals. They're great for rodent control and things like that, but they eat bluebirds. And so, there's a guard that you can put around the front of the box that can really help with that. Or you can put a baffle on a pole. Baffle is a physical obstruction that prevents the animal from getting to where the box is. All right, so I'm not going to go to my hummingbird appendix because I've run out of time, but I answer questions about hummingbirds if anybody wants to. So Carolyn, could I maybe show a couple of these boxes real quick and then open up to questions?
Absolutely. Why don't you stop sharing your screen and then I'll make you big and then we'll see your boxes.
I'm going to stop sharing and then we're big. And so now everybody can see me big. All right. So this, let's see. So this is a bluebird box. You're not going to, let's see.
It's good. We can see it.
Okay. Yep. So this is like the whole thing. And then on the front, this is the guard I was telling you about. So this is a wire guard that just affixes to the front of the box. And it's got these pointy things that stick out. They're not going to puncture anything, but they're sharp enough to be uncomfortable. So a snake would not want to drag its belly over this, and a raccoon just simply can't get in here and cause trouble. This works about 98% of the time. There's always a chance that something can get in there, but it is extremely effective, and it's also cheap. It's like it's in a $12 insurance policy for your Bluebird house is not bad. I like this particular box because it opens on two sides. So on this side, there's actually some plexiglass in here. So if you want to open it and see what's going on in there, just a little bit safer to do it that way. And then on the other side, it's just completely open. So you can get in there and you can get inside and clean out the bird's nests. And then I'll just show you briefly, by contrast, this is a Wren Chickadee box, cute little box. It's got a hook on it. You can hang this thing pretty much anywhere, right? So the other birds aren't quite as particular as the bluebirds are. So I think that I'll stop there and field any questions that people have.
Great. Well, that was really fun. There's a lot of really good questions. So if you all don't mind, I'll ask the questions in the chat and then I'll let you unmute because I don't want to miss any of these. Grace made a comment, the most commonly used pesticide in the US reduces the bird's appetite, thus inhibiting fat storage, and so many perish. That was early on in your talk, you talked about that.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about specific pesticides, but I don't use any in my lawn, and I worry about large scale pesticide use as well. So it's
yeah, for birds and bees and everything else.
Yes.
What program that alerts municipalities to peak migratory times? Is it dark sky? Did you mention?
Lights out.
Lights out.
Lights out. Yeah, and you can go. I think if you just Google it, you can see the whole program, and you can see all the cities that are listed. And another point on migration, one of the things that's really helped with these issues is using weather satellites to visualize migration. So you can actually go, I believe it's the Cornell Lab of Ornithology actually, where it's like Birdcast is what it's called. And you can see when there are going to be these large movements of birds, and you can see it visually on a map because they're using weather radar to detect these enormous flocks of birds.
Fascinating.
But yeah, so you can actually, you'll actually know when it's happening. The birders love it. Birders love it because they can see when things are looking to be real hopping. And then, they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get out there and see what they can find.
That's awesome. Yes, I've been on a mountaintop with birders when my son was young. I know those people.
Yeah.
It's great. What do you think about Birdbath with heaters?
So I love them, right? And we sell baths where the heating element is actually incorporated into the bath itself. And then we also sell a little insert that you can put. So if you already have a bird bath, that you can put into it. They all require an outlet. So you're going to need to run, most people will need to run an extension cord, an outdoor rated cord to the bath. Then there are other people, like me, I've got a lot of bird baths and some of them are just not close to outlets. So I will go and just, if it's completely iced over, I'll just pour hot water over the ice until it melts. But I'm a huge fan of heated bird baths.
Great. Liz asked about cleaning up last year's Bluebird boxes. You already answered that.
Okay.
Marion answered, what month do hummingbirds generally return in spring to Charlottesville?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the nest thing just briefly. It's not necessarily a bad idea to leave the last nesting of the last nest material of the season in the box. Some people feel like it can provide a little additional warmth over the winter months, but it's definitely a good idea to go ahead and get that nest out now if there's any material in there. So the hummingbirds, by and large, we say tax day. April 15th is about the time when they show up. Having said that, sometimes it's a little early, sometimes it's a little later, so there's definitely variability. And the other thing that happens is, the first hummingbirds that get here are the males. And so they're just kind of here by themselves. So there's not as many. And then the females show up. And then, after they mate and the broods start coming out, that's when you tend to see more hummingbirds. So every year I've got people who are really worried because the hummingbird population seems down. But, then by August, we're like, oh my goodness, I'm awash in hummingbirds.
Okay. Speaking of hummingbirds, if they're feeders, is there any way to keep bees, wasps, and other insects away from hummingbird feeders?
Yeah, so we sell a hummingbird feeder that on the underside of where the ports are. So the ports are where the hummingbird is going to put its beak and stick its tongue in. Underneath, there is a protrusion that you can put. It's like a silicone nipple with a crosshatch cut in the bottom of it that slides over that protrusion. A little hard to explain, but I hope you're getting the visualization. And basically what that does is the hummingbird can get its beak and its tongue down into the nectar just fine, but it doesn't allow the nectar to come up, and so the bees will leave it alone, right? So the bees can't get to it, but the bees can't get to it, but the hummingbird can. An interesting thing to keep in mind about hummingbirds is when you're thinking about whether they can get down into their nectar, their tongue is as long as their beak.
Oh, wow.
So they have a long reach to be able to get down into the nectar.
Great. Wow. Can you put a bluebird house under a tree?
We don't recommend it. The bluebirds tend not to like to be under a canopy. Again, they like to have a bit more of an open setting. If it were on the edge of the canopy of a tree, that would probably be fine. I would certainly never affix one to a tree personally. Does that mean if you put it under a tree that a bluebird wouldn't take up residence? No, it's all about just likelihood. It's more likely if it's in a more open area.
Gotcha. Here's another comment. There's a movement to give nature rights. Love this because we play whack-a-mole with environmental disaster otherwise. Have you heard?
I am not familiar with nature rights as a movement.
Okay. How can you prevent mosquitoes breeding in a bird bath during the summer?
So mosquitoes don't like movement in the water. And so, you can either get a fountain, which are beautiful. They can be kind of expensive, or you can get a little device called a water wiggler. This is basically, it looks a little bit like a little tiny robot. It doesn't move. It's just like this little dome thing with 4 wire legs. And then out the bottom of it, it has like a little propeller that agitates the water. And so that is effective in knocking down, mosquito population. I will go back, not specifically to talk about, environmental and natural rights, but I really focus on like, what can I as an individual do in the realm over which I have influence, which just happens to be my house and yard in Charlottesville. And maybe it's Pollyannish of me, but I think of this a lot as like if you go to Italy or the Middle East and you see the mosaics, right? Now, one tile doesn't look like much, 10 tiles doesn't look like much, 100 tiles, maybe that doesn't look like much. Once you've got thousands and thousands of tiles all together, you've got a picture, and I think of my place here in Charlottesville as one tile. And if enough people plant native plants, put out bird feeders, don't use pesticides, or try to be environmentally friendly around their house, that makes a big difference for the birds.
It's interesting. We just had a person give a talk on beekeeping, and I was astonished. I don't remember the percentage, but it was well over 40% of the honeybees that are out there are because of people doing that backyard beekeeping.
Yeah. I think, and I'll get off of this, but I think that it's so easy to get overwhelmed in the face of enormous problems, challenges. It's very easy to shut down. But the birds around my house are happy and they are active, and I am doing my part. And yes, I still worry about the bigger things, but I'm just going to do what I can. And I try to help people through my store in the same way.
Lots of good questions coming in. Is there a food the bears won't touch? Boy, that's one I'd love to know.
No. So bears are, I love the black bears. I mean, they are wonderful animals. They're agile. They're smart. They are absolutely ravenous when it comes to bird food. So now, one small caveat. I have had people who have had repeated bear visits who have put out one of our hot pepper products. So birds lack the receptors for capsaicin. So they don't have the receptors in their brain that tells them that chili peppers are hot. So it doesn't affect their mouth or their digestion or anything like that. Squirrels, raccoons, human beings, bears have it. And so we've had some customers where they've had repeated bear visits, and they would just put out like one of our hot pepper cylinders, almost to bait the bear. And then the bear shows up, takes a big bite of it. And the hope is that the imprint is, this is really no longer a great place to eat. I'm going to go down to the neighbor's garbage. Our primary recommendation with bears is take your feeders in at night. That's not 100% successful, especially younger bears, moms with cubs. You can see them during the day. It definitely reduces the likelihood, though.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that capsaicin receptor not being in birds is fortuitous.
Yeah. Now, I will say bears love suet. They can smell suet. They love suet. They love garbage. So, and compost.
Nice. Well, I think there's 3 more questions in the chat. I'm sorry, I was going to open it up to folks, but I think we'll just go with those and then spin the wheel for the prize. Okay. So Tom said you showed 2 really neat birdhouses. How can I order these online? And what are the stock number descriptions? I don't live in Charlottesville.
Okay. So neither of these are actually on my online store. And well, yeah, I don't think they are. So, Tom, what I would do is call the store, which is, I hope you have the pen and paper ready. I mean, you can always Google it and you can find it easily, but the store number is 434-973-5850. And we can do it over the phone and then ship it to you. And then the one item is the open two-sided Bluebird House. Number's 3042. I feel like I'm on QVC. And then the other one is called Wren in the Wind, which is a pun, WREN, Wren in the Wind, 6203.
Great, thank you. How far apart should Bluebird boxes be placed? Can they be facing each other across the yard?
I would try not to have them facing each other. And, 50 yards, 100 yards is ideal. You could potentially have them closer if they were not facing each other, but we really do recommend a wide berth. So, I mean, one thing you could do is if you have a Bluebird house on one side of your house, say, but the other side of the house would also be, a good place for when you could do that, because then they wouldn't really see each other. But 50 to 100 yards, and I wouldn't face them towards each other.
These are great questions. Last question here from Grace. Please discuss the value of planting natives. Center for Environmental Rights.org. The movement started in Pennsylvania when fracking wastewater was proposed to be dumped. Now 14 places have adopted this. Nature needs the right to be protected for sure.
So I will start by saying I am not an expert in plants. However, what is absolutely true is, and there's a book called Bringing, if I had to give you one book recommendation today, it would be a book called Bringing Nature Home by a guy named Doug Tallamy, Tallamy. And this is one of these books I read and I was kind of like, oh, this is simple and makes so much sense. And I can't believe I never thought of it. And so basically the premise is we've got all of these plants, ornamentals that we put around our house, or we do these yards, these large manicured yards, and that's not supporting insect life. And nobody's saying that we want a whole bunch of Japanese beetles like swarming around, but guess what? The Japanese beetle is an invasive animal. So if you plant native plants that are then, that provide food and habitat for native insects, well, the birds eat the native insects, and so do higher order animals as well. So if your yard is filled with plants that are non-natives and then a big expanse of grass, you're just not going to have a lot of insects around. And so in addition to, providing insects, native berries are important, but birds will also eat non-natives. They'll eat invasive berries and spread those. So, you got to be careful about that. And then, obviously shelter. So native plants are just absolutely critical. And when I think of native like to Virginia. So I've got my Virginia Native Plant Society book that I look at and I talk to people, and I'm not saying don't have any ornamentals. I'm not that dogmatic, right? I'm not saying don't plant anything but natives, but we have beautiful natives. Put some beautiful natives in your yard. Your dogwood, serviceberry, viburnum. There's so many more, obviously. And as I said, I'm not a plant expert.
Right. Well, thank you so much. This has been great, and what a great attendance.